This video is about the timelines of the end times in the Bible, including the Millennium and the Second Coming. And there's more detail in my new book, God, Mind, Body, available now to read for free on my website, robertensor.com, spelled Ensor, or you can buy it from Amazon as a paperback or an ebook, and there'll be links in the description below. So this is basically a summary of part three of God, Mind, Body, which is about prophecy. I've compiled a timeline of the eschatological period around the tribulation. Now, I can't be sure this timeline's correct. After all, Jesus said we will not know the day or the hour that he will return. There isn't really enough information provided in the Bible to be absolutely certain of the timeline, for which God had his reasons, which I respect. And there's an alternative timeline in God, Mind, Body. This timeline is concerned with Daniel's 70th week, which is a period of roughly 7 years, also known as the time of Jacob's trouble and the tribulation. And the timeline treats Daniel's week, as a 7 year period, and it uses Daniel's prophetic year of 360 days, which is based on plenty of scriptural evidence that is presented in the book God, Mind, Body. There are other potential timelines you could make, but due to the amount of time that is, good for a video, I've selected one of the most plausible for the purposes of this video. And this video kind of assumes a working knowledge of eschatological terms like the beast and the abomination of desolation. So if you aren't familiar with those terms, I recommend you watch the Introduction to Prophecy video and my previous videos in the God, Mind, Body playlist. Now, I'll put the timeline up on the screen, and as you can see, day one of the 70th week will have the two witnesses beginning, the seal judgments beginning. Then you've got the 144,000 elect being sealed, the trumpet judgments. Then 1,185 days in, there's the abomination of desolation. 1,215 days in, there's the persecution period, the Antichrist persecuting the saints, and the beast, also known as the Antichrist's 42-month authority to continue, beginning at that point. 1,260 days in, the two witnesses are killed, as they are prophesied to be killed in the book of Revelation and then resurrected and ascend 3 days later. 2,475 days in, which is 1,290 days from the abomination of desolation, there'll be the second coming, the rapture, the throne's judgment in the book of Revelation, beginning at that time, and the abomination of desolation will end. 2,520 days in, which is 1,335 days from the abomination of desolation being set up, the 1,000 year reign of Christ and the saints begins, the millennium. The blessed enter the kingdom, and the temple of Ezekiel, is dedicated. So, the two witnesses are from Revelation chapter 11, and they are the reincarnations of Elijah and Moses, who are prophesied to evangelize Jerusalem in the future end times. The sealed judgments are a series of wars, famines, and natural catastrophes in the early chapters of the book of Revelation. The 144,000 elect are a group of end times people from the 12 tribes of Israel mentioned in Revelation chapter 7 who will participate in the rapture. The trumpet judgments are the second series of divine judgments in the book of Revelation. The abomination of desolation is prophesied to occur in the book of Daniel and Jesus' Olivet discourse. It's prophesied to be a removal of the regular burnt offering, which traditionally occurred in the temple. The Antichrist, or little horn, as he's described in the book of Daniel, is prophesied to persecute saints in Daniel chapter 7 and the book of Revelation. The 1,260 days is a figure given for the wilderness exile of a woman symbolically representing Israel, or the remnant of Israel, in Revelation chapter 12. And the 1,260 days is also known as time, times, and half a time, with time being a year, times being 2 years, and half a time is half a year. So it's 3.5 years on the prophetic calendar is 1,260 days. And that is the period given in Daniel for the Antichrist persecution of saints, which is why the woman representing Israel flees to the wilderness for that time period. The beast, also known as the Antichrist, is prophesied to continue for 42 months in the book of Revelation. Daniel foretold that there would be 1290 days from the removal of the burnt offering and the time the abomination of desolation is set up, and that the one who waits and comes to the 1335 days will be blessed. That's from Daniel chapter 12. So the main strength of this timeline is that everything Daniel defined as covered by the scope of his 70 weeks prophecy, to finish disobedience, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy, is included within the 2,520-day limit of Daniel's 70th week, according to the prophetic calendar, with vision and prophecy defined as all the prophecies contained in the entire book of Daniel. So the most holy here is a translation of the Hebrew Kodesh Kodeshim, which referred to the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the temple. And this will be the temple outlined in the book of Ezekiel on the Holy Mountain, a 50 square mile plateau in the area of Jerusalem after some pretty serious topographical changes in that region that are prophesied to occur. So another positive is that this timeline accounts for distinct events occurring 1290 days from the abomination and 1335 days from the abomination, which is how it is in the book of Daniel chapter 12. The 1290-day mark signifies the second coming, together with the end of the abomination of desolation, and the 1335-day point marks the inauguration of the millennial kingdom and the dedication of the new temple, providing 45 days for the first throne's judgment described in the book of Revelation and the worldwide regathering of the mortal Jewish diaspora foretold in the prophets. The main issue with this timeline is that the abomination is not exactly in the middle of the week, as Daniel wrote that it would be, but it is approximately in the middle. And the 42 months the beast has power to continue for would not commence from the abomination of desolation and may not be exactly the same as the 1260-day time of the woman's refuge in the wilderness, since Jesus made it plain that the remnant would need to flee for the wilderness, the mountains, as soon as they see the abomination of desolation in Matthew 24. So, however, it could take 30 days for the remnant to make it to Petra, which is basically, Bozrah, from Judea, and the urgency of their flight may be due to the Edomites standing in the crossroads to block their escape, which is found in Obadiah 1:14. And in other words, this would be Jordan closing its border to incoming Israeli refugees after a certain point in the latter-day Exodus. Now, you would assume that the beast will have total power at the time of the abomination of desolation in order to get away with committing such a sacrilegious act, but his 42-month authority and persecution would come later in this timeline, which is, a kind of negative of the timeline, at least creates some questions. So the Antichrist must have power to make war until the second coming, because he will fight a battle against Jesus on the day of the Lord. Therefore, I've ended the 42 months of his authority to continue on the day of the second coming. So the wrath that the raptured elect are exempted from, that St. Paul said that, certain Christians would be exempted from, this is the wrath of Jesus when he reappears on earth to fight the Antichrist and his armies, and his wrath at the throne judgments of Revelation. So the elect will not be subject to that wrath because they will be in immortalized bodies while it's ongoing and will pass the throne judgments. They will also not be targeted by the natural catastrophes of the tribulation, although some degree of collateral damage may occur. This is not necessarily a pre-wrath rapturist position, however, since the rapture will begin at the moment Christ reappears and it will still be in progress. The gathering from the four winds of heaven will be occurring while God's wrath is unfolding in Edom. And that definition of wrath is different from many pre-wrath rapturists' definition of wrath, who would situate God's wrath earlier in the tribulation timeline. So the tribulation or suffering for the elect will end at the point they are changed into immortal bodies, as Paul prophesied. Therefore, the rapture will be post-tribulational from their perspective. Whether or not I believe Jesus will come after the tribulation depends on how precisely you define the tribulation. If your idea of the tribulation includes the campaign of Armageddon, then I would not technically be a post-tribulationist. But I do believe that shortly after Jesus' reappearance on that very day, the upheavals racking the earth will stop. So, in that sense, I'm only a few hours away from being a post-tribulationist. Though personally, I define the tribulation as ending with the victory of Jesus over the Antichrist, since there will be suffering or tribulation during the campaign of Armageddon, but Jesus' arrival will bring that whole tribulation period to an end pretty quickly. I call this theological position end tribulation premillennialism. The reasons for this position are given at length in the book God, Mind, Body and my other videos on the subject, but one of the main ones is that Jesus said in Matthew 24, the second coming and the gathering of the chosen ones from the four winds of heaven, in other words, the rapture, would take place after the suffering of those days, meaning the false Christ, the earthquakes, the wars, the famines, and persecution mentioned earlier in the Olivet Discourse. So the rapture is also described as occurring with the sounding of the trumpet and the coming of Christ with his angels in flaming fire in Paul's letters to the Thessalonians, and the trumpet sounds when the Son of Man, Jesus, comes with the clouds in Matthew 24, verses 30 to 31. So there's more detail in the book God, Mind, Body. And after this timeline, there will be the 1,000-year reign of Christ and the saints on the earth called the Millennium. Now, the premillennialist position is correct. At the end of that millennium, there will be the potentially second Magog war, the Gog-Magog conflict spoken of in the book of Revelation. And at the end of the millennium, there'll be the last judgment or great white throne judgment described in the book of Revelation, to be followed by the formation of the new heaven, the new earth, and the deathless New Jerusalem. Now, this timeline is drawn mainly from Revelation chapters 20, 21, and 22. So here you see you've got the church age following the first advent, Daniel's 70th week, with the second advent, the second coming towards the end of the week, then the millennium, then the last judgment, then the New Jerusalem. And now we come to the campaign of Armageddon, which is the war between Jesus and the Antichrist on the day Jesus returns. So it begins with Jesus coming with the clouds to save the Bozrah Petra remnant. Raptured elect are gathered at Petra, which is in Jordan, and Jesus' angels and the elect journey to save Jerusalem from the Antichrist armies, which were previously gathered at Armageddon. And then there's the battle for Jerusalem. Jesus and his forces, including some Jewish people who are in mortal bodies, defeat the Antichrist armies, and the massive earthquake foretold in Zechariah 14 creates the millennial plateau called Zion in Scripture. Then the elect and Jesus regroup on Mount Zion, and the first thrones judgment period begins. And the citations from the Bible to back this timeline up, come from Isaiah, for example, who introduced the concept of a remnant of the Jewish people who survived the time of Jacob's trouble and remained faithful. And here's a quote from Micah 2:12 on the subject of the remnant. I will surely assemble all of you, Jacob. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Bozrah, as a flock in the middle of their pasture. And this Bozrah is basically identified in God, Mind, Body as Petra, one of the seven new wonders of the world. And so this campaign of Armageddon timeline is also based on Isaiah's savior figure coming from Edom and Bozrah, covered in blood, because he has been fighting, and that's from Isaiah 63. So Yahweh comes from Teman, which is also in Edom, in the book of Habakkuk. Now, all of this taken together with the Antichrist gathering his armies at Armageddon or Megiddo, when you take it together with Zechariah chapter 14, which describes the battle between Jesus and the Antichrist army for Jerusalem, with the Antichrist forces sacking Jerusalem, and then, Jesus comes and the Antichrist army are afflicted by plagues. They turn on each other. They have their flesh melt away like the Nazis at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then Yahweh, who's, you know, Jesus in this context, stands on the Mount of Olives and creates a huge earthquake for the Jerusalemites to flee to safety. So, yeah, it's a predictably one-sided fight. God wins and the Antichrist loses. And there's more detail on these subjects in the book God, Mind, Body, available now to read for free on my website, or you can buy it from Amazon. Thanks for listening.